Truth, cover-ups, lies, and in between. Conspiracies and those who dare to speak the truth. Get ready for a walk on the wild side. Welcome to Parley with your host, Michael Gray.
Hi all, my name is Mike Gray and welcome to another episode of Parley, and we have a really great guest tonight with us, the one and the only Sean David Morton. Hey Sean, you there?
I'm here.
Sean! I gotta tell you, man.
We don't get music or stuff behind it or anything?
We're gonna put some music in. Don't blow the effect, Sean. The music.
Okay, all right. Sorry.
Sean, I gotta tell you, I'm a big fan of yours.
Thank you. I'm a big fan of yours, Michael.
Really?
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for all the information and jokes and stories you send me. I've read so many of the things that you've sent me on the air, so I very much appreciate it.
Just to let the audience know that you have a radio show on Revolutionary Radio. Strange Universe is your show. But like I said, I've been a big fan of yours for a while now, and I do send you emails and links.
No, it's great fun.
It's a thrill to just hear. It's really funny, the stuff that I send you early in the day, to hear you reading it or mentioning it live on the air. And it's
because you send me a lot of really good stuff, not only good stuff, but things that are funny and very interesting, and a lot of other things across the board. So it's been great corresponding with you and getting to know you and understanding what an erudite and locucious individual you are. So. So when you're just a humble mendicant like me begging for alms on street corners, it's always nice to hear.
I can only hope to be as helpful as Steve Travesty, your producer.
Okay. Oh, Steve's a lot of fun.
He's the name Steve Travesty.
I don't know, and he's also not only Steve Travesty, but it's also his internet name is Hated Patriot. So my problem is, as a producer, if I want to get a guest on, and you get a Skype, please add me as a contact. Do you really want to know a person named Hated Patriot?
Or Travesty?
Yeah, or Travesty, yeah. So
his last name is what is his last? No, you better not
I cannot reveal that on
don't.
Don't. There's a reason why people have radio names, but it's not Travesty, and it's just fun because he's a kid, and he's a heavy metal guy, and he's my pet Wookieye, So if I'm going to be Han Solo, he's my pet Wookiee. So if I'm flying the Millennium Falcon, then I have to have somebody, gotta be back there fixing stuff. So it's good fun.
But he comes up with some pretty interesting stuff, I have to say.
He does. I just can never trust him with the music. I give him whenever the moon's in Aries, I let him pick songs to my infinite regret. So, cause he always picks like Guar or Insane Clown Posse.
Yeah.
Just stuff that just makes oh my God. I'm like, can I throw my genes inside your skull because your brain is just a washing machine? So there it goes. What are we going to talk about tonight? What can we talk about?
Well, first let's get your information out of the way. Let's do some plugs for you because we know you need to sell some books, which I have. When we'll talk a little bit about Sands of Time because I have a few questions about that book. But you have 3 books out.
No, I've got a bunch. I've got, let me see. I have Black Seraph. That was my first novel that I've actually now turned into a film, and I have a screenplay for, and we're talking to some pretty major people about that. It's based on a character named Father Dominic Lindquist, who is half Irish, half Bedouin, and he works as a spy for the Jesuits, undercover in the Arab terror networks. And Black Seraph was written in 2004, and each one of my books seems to have predicted a lot of things. So when I first wrote Black Seraph, it was all about Father Lindquist, who's also known as Abdul the Bandit, who goes underground to steal the plans for a DNA bomb, a genetic weapon that theoretically, hypothetically, you could drop this bomb on Jerusalem as an example, and it would kill every Eastern European Ashkenazic Jew in Israel and leave just the Palestinians and the Arabs as an example. Now, I find this kind of weird because
which some people say they have.
Oh, of course they do.
Yeah,
as a
matter
of fact, David Kelly, who was a was working on exactly that. He was working on genetic weapons when he and his supposedly, and I know for a fact that David Kelly, the bioengineer and genetic weapons expert, was disappeared. He and his family were supposedly killed in a car accident, but they were taken into the British version of the witness protection program is called Project Gaia. And, it's like The Prisoner as an example. I'm sure there's islands all over the world or something very much like the old Patrick McGowan TV show, The Prisoner. And, it's called Project Gaia, and that's their version of the British witness protection program. So, that's exactly what Kelly was working on at the time. So my guy steals a genetic weapon, makes himself a target, if you will. And all of this is for him to actually then flush out the Nazis that were actually in the Vatican, who at that time were planning on assassinating or taking out John Paul. And of course, then that proves prophetic, because then you have Cardinal Ratzinger, who then takes over everything and becomes Pope Benedict the 16th. And of course, he was Hitler Youth and had all these Nazi connections and was part of the Odessa file, which had to do with the Nazi rat line of the Catholic Church actually funneling all these Germans and Nazis, and quite possibly Hitler himself.
And looked like Darth Sidious from Star Wars.
And looks exactly like Darth Sidious. Yeah, there is that. Yes. That then you had the Jesuits, who had a long conversation with Benedict, specifically the Knights of Malta. And the Knights of Malta have about a 4-hour chat with this particular Pope, in essence saying that he is not pressing the war with Islam sufficiently. And then it's really weird, because after the Jesuits talked to him from noon to about 4 o'clock, and then lightning strikes St. Peter's Basilica not once but twice. And at 6 o'clock that night, 6 p.m. that night, 2 hours after he has this chat with the Knights of Malta, hence the Jesuits, if you will, he resigns his position. He becomes the first Pope to resign in 700 years. And then suddenly you have Pope Francis, who, by the way, is Italian. I don't know why these people say he's Argentinian. He grew up in Italy. And then his parents, when he was about 10, I think, then moved him to Argentina. So he's Italian through and through, but he's also the first pope that we've had, who also just so happens to be a Jesuit. And the Jesuits they're the CIA. If you imagine the CIA with 1,500 years of training, if you will, and intelligence to draw from, and virtually unlimited budget, you get an idea of how deadly and lethal the Jesuits really are. And you can trace the Jesuits all the way back. I mean, if you believe that the intelligence agencies of the world were responsible for 9/11, if that's your ballywick, then you've got to trace back who those people are. And nobody gets anywhere in FBI, CIA, DNI, ONI, the Dioxin Bureau, the Politburo, anywhere on Earth. You don't get anywhere in an intelligence or police organization without being connected to the Jesuits.
Well, the Jesuits were the original spy ring.
Yeah, they're the Society of Jesus.
Medieval times, yeah.
And there's a reason why the head is called he's the father, he's the Jesuit general. He's the father general. He's not a superior. He's a general, because he really does actually control an army. So that was my first book. My second book in that series was same character, Father Dominic Lindquist, but this time it got a little messier, because now I had a book called The Dark Prophet, Veil of the Antichrist. And Father Lindquist is exiled to a monastery in France, and he finds out that this monastery is actually the tip of an iceberg for a huge intelligence operation. And there's a man who then rises out of the Middle East. He actually finds the second book that was written by Muhammad, called the Book of Truth, also known as the Alienation of the Rose. Well, Muhammad wrote 2 books. He didn't write them. Muhammad gets beaten up by the Christians, beaten up by the Jews, goes off to a cave, says that he goes to heaven and talks to Gabriel, comes out mumbling a bunch of crazy stuff, and then his 4 buddies follow him around and start writing down all this weird stuff he starts mumbling. And then they go to war with the rest of the world. So anybody who doesn't accept Islam gets killed. He has, I don't know how many wives he had at that time, but Aisha, who is, I think, his 6th wife, I think, she was 9 years old. And he said, well, I saw another book in heaven, and, if you screw me, if you marry me, I'll give you that other book. And so Aisha and her son then write another book, which is called The Alienation of the Rose, also known as the Book of Truth. Now, this Book of Truth, interestingly enough, did preach peace amongst all the people, and did lead to an Islamic caliphate at that time, which was kind of heaven on earth, really. From the 9th, 10th, and 11th centuries, Cordoba, Spain, was the center and the jewel of civilization. They had hot and cold running water, gaslit streets, advanced medicine, and they accepted all the people of the book. That book disappears in 1195 AD, and then things start going very, very badly for Islam in general with the beginning of the Crusades. Anyway, so the whole point is that there's a guy who finds this book, he unites Islam together, and then he starts this crusade against the West. And his whole point is to travel to Cordoba, Spain, where he wants to preach in what was the former mosque in Cordoba, Spain, and bring millions of people with him, which this massive immigration wave would then collapse what's going on and would then collapse European society.
Let me ask you something. Did you see the movie, this is about predictive programming, Children of Men? Did you see that movie?
No, I didn't.
Well, that movie's kind of interesting because it takes place in the future, in the near future. But basically, no children are being born. It's like all of a sudden no women could get pregnant, okay? That's the main storyline. But behind the storyline is in Europe, all the European countries are putting foreigners in detention centers to forcibly deport them.
Okay.
And
that would be probably a good idea for the Europeans to do right now.
Well, but I mean, it was violent, violently done.
And it's called Children of Men?
Children of Men, yeah, with Julianne Moore and British actor. Julianne Moore and Clive Owen.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, I love Clive Owen and
Julianne
movie.
Moore. Yeah, I mean, it's a good movie.
I'll bring it up on Netflix and watch it tonight.
Yeah, so you should watch that.
So anyway, that was my second book. It's just called Veil of the Antichrist, where it shows what the Catholic Church does to defeat this guy. And then, then my other two books right now are kind of an interesting other path. There was a man that I was in contact with ever since my 51, all the way back in, starting really about 89, 1990 is when I launched into investigating a lot of this bizarre UFO stuff. It started in 89. Where we actually did an investigation into a place called the Dulce Archuleta Mesa, where we ultrasounded the mountain and actually proved that there was some kind of facility, some kind of top secret underground facility inside the mountain, using basically ultrasound and ground penetrating radar on a massive basis. We proved there was something there, and so I got this job with a documentary crew in 1990, where we did a worldwide documentary called UFO Contactees, and we put together about 600 hours of footage with scientists, abductees, contactees, researchers. I mean, somebody had a dog barked at a UFO. We went out and filmed it. So Joe Randazzo and myself and Richard Kashansky, and Joe had a budget of about $250,000, and we went all over the world. We went to Billy Meyer's farm. We went up and down Italy. We went to France, Canada, Venezuela. We went everywhere and put this footage together with primarily people that had been contacted, had positive and negative contacts in the UFO phenomenon. I mean, we were in the fields in England in May of 90 when the modern crop circle phenomenon began. We were at Billy Meyer's farm, where I became pretty good friends with Billy Meyer and his son Methuselah. This was over the years, and put all this whole thing together, which later became UFO Library magazine that I was editing and writing for a while until a flood wiped out Joe Randazzo's house with a lot of his stuff. But that then led to an interview with a guy named Bob Lazar. I interviewed Lazar, who worked as a scientist at Area 51. Lazar said, "You don't have to believe anything I say. You go out to this valley on Highway 375 in the middle of nowhere in Nevada, near the town of Rachel, and you go on Wednesday nights and you'll see him test flying saucers." And so a year later, this is February of 91, I went out there with a girl I knew from the LA Times, Shannon Sands, and she brought a photographer along with her and another buddy of mine, Jeff. And Jeff and I had our car swooped by this UFO. I mean, it came in right in front of us on the road on its edge. It flattened out. We just kind of smashed the car into the shoulder on the side of the road. We jumped out of the car. We chased after this thing. We got our faces all burned by it. I mean, that's how close it came to us. And then it shot off into the valley and was just all bouncing around. So, a group of about 60 of us were watching this thing doing all these maneuvers on the public side of the valley under a very low cloud cover, only maybe 50 feet off the ground or so, which of course then in the LA Times became, crazy people watching UFOs, and a whole story about us demanding this photographer take a photo of the craft. And he's like, I can't. I brought a portrait camera that's only got a range of 12 feet, and I've only been told to take pictures of people looking at UFOs, not to take pictures of UFOs. Oh, and it's raining, and I'm going home. So that began kind of the odyssey of my, completely freaking out at this and going out there like every week to investigate this phenomenon, which then led to me finding a hilltop that looked down on the base at Area 51, someplace that they forgot to expand their borders to. Of course, we got hassled quite a bit by it. But, that then led to the sightings program and my producing for sightings when Little Molten How put it together. And I was one of the producers on the Area 51 piece for that. And sightings then became the highest rated show ever on the Fox television network at that time, which then led to a 13-episode series. It did not get renewed because of some legal. Basically, the people producing it wanted 24 episodes. Fox only wanted 13. And, they took their ball and went home, and that was pretty much the end of sightings. But then that led to my producing on,
and that was a very highly rated show.
It was the highest rated show. Yes, it was the single highest rated program on Fox up to that time was sightings.
Didn't Henry Winkler produce that?
Yes. It was actually a bunch of people. It was Henry Winkler. Well, remember, Linda Moulton Howe got her name on it as creator, but then it was Henry Winkler, Ann Daniels, Fair Dinkum Productions, Henry Winkler Productions, which was really cool for me because I was not only a big fan of the Fonz, but Henry Winkler actually came. I met him when I was 16 years old because he came to our high school to give a speech, and I got to meet him then. So that was really fun for me to be able to work for him now on something. Yeah. I actually went to, and then I asked the producer to.
I was a fan of his movies outside of the Fonz, like Night Shift. That was a great movie.
Yeah, Night Shift. Oh no, he's great stuff. He's the Night Shift. He did Waterboy. He's
Lords
a great
of
actor.
Flatbush. Yeah.
Did Lords of Flatbush, and with Sylvester Stallone and all that. So, but it was cool. But after we did the pilot, I went back to Paul Hall, who was the producer, and said I'd really like to, produce. I want a job. And he literally said his exact words were, "Well, great, Sean, but we really want to hire people that don't know anything." His exact words. Like he didn't want to hire anybody that was a true believer that couldn't be fair and balanced about whatever was going on. Even though I had 600 hours of video with all these people and I knew everybody everywhere all over the world, which by the way was then a database that I then turned over to Art Bell to allow him to use as the basis for a show that, later had an audience of like 26 million people. But that then led to my producing for hard copy, as a freelance producer, hard copy, working on stuff for Unsolved Mysteries, had a thing with Geraldo called Now Can Be Told.
Wait, I gotta stop you. Hard copy. Did you work with Bill O'Reilly directly?
No, I was there long after O'Reilly was gone.
Oh, okay.
And I never met the hosts. The hosts that was all canned segments. I worked with guys like Wayne Darwin and Victor Marsh and all that. But no, O'Reilly was, I didn't even realize that O'Reilly, I wasn't a fan of the show. I didn't even realize that that's where O'Reilly got his start. That's how ignorant I was. But, when you go into Paramount, you pitch ideas of what you can do for them. And then if it's cheap enough, usually they'll send you out on it. And we got away with some spectacular stuff because we were considered kind of tabloid TV. And when you're doing things right in between, Sybil Shepherd dated Elvis and Madonna's lesbian love kiss, you can get away with a bunch of stuff. But we were the number 2 highest rated show on TV behind Entertainment Tonight on at 7:30. And they gave us a segment.
I used to watch that show. Yeah, I used to watch that show.
They gave us a segment called The X-Man. And we had a whole thing with a guy with a fedora in the shadows with a cigarette, and it was narrated by Don LaFontaine, who's the famous guy. It was like, in a world, there's a man in a town who came to a place, and he had that great voice. And the head of Paramount came down on us. A guy named Frank Gifford just came down and said, "What the hell are you doing, letting these guys run around, put this stuff on TV?" Because the investigations that I was into, we found out what exactly happened with TWA Flight 800. We did a whole thing on the JFK Jr. assassination. We were the ones that actually found the Fiat Uno, in the conspiracy behind Princess Diana's death. God, I can't even say how many things we did. We did a thing on Sedona. We did the Phoenix Lights. When the Phoenix Lights came back around, we did the first national stories on the Phoenix Lights. And all the stuff that we did on that later became a special called, Danger in Our Skies. Which also then led us to this also led to Strange Universe Television, which then ran on it's one of the first original shows on UPN, which then ran for 3 years on UPN. I was giving a lecture in New York, And a man named Bill Siegel came up to me and handed me his card, and it said Chris Craft Industries on it. And I just laughed and handed it back to him and said, well, I really can't afford a boat right now, but thank you so much. And he goes, no, my brother and I, we just bought a television station called UPN, a television network, and we'd like you to work on it. So that's where Strange Universe came from. And still to this day, the fact that we were just hounded on by the head of the network, this lady Lucy Sulhaney, who decided to turn it into like a black entertainment network or something. And she just did weird stuff with the show because she'd done Arsenio Hall.
That was what's his name? Jesse Jackson wanted them to give them UPN. Remember that?
Yeah, I know. Well, because the joke was that it stood for, and this came from the black actors, by the way, that it stood for underpaid Negroes, is UPN. And this came from Moesha and Brandy but Lucy Sulhaney had actually made her money off of Arsenio, but she was also the one who famously signed Chevy Chase to a $20 million 5-year contract.
Oh, was that Arsenio's producer?
That was her, yes. And she was now the head of the network. And I'm sitting there going, wait a minute, originally we had Star Trek Voyager, we had Gemini Man with Bruce Greenberg. He was the guy who's the captain in the new Star Trek movies. Greenwood. Bruce Greenwood was actually on the network. And we had Strange Universe as well, which was a great show, 5 days a week strip show. Everybody was loving it. And she moved us all over the place. She put us at 11 and 11:30 and 12 o'clock. And the show still lasted 3 years. So so anyways, did Strange Universe, did the pilots on Strange Universe. It lasted like 3 years, which was all good. Then was also working on the Sci-Fi Channel. We started the Sci-Fi Channel out of a garage in Sylmar with the first original show on Sci-Fi, which was called Mysteries from Beyond the Other Dominion with Dr. Franklin Rule and Jim Carbonetti and Art Maturo and all these guys. And we just, did you know that clams are from Venus? Crazy stuff like that. And I had a pilot for a show called Declassified that I did a 14-minute pilot for. And it was going to go as a show on Sci-Fi. And then Sci-Fi called us and said, well, I'm sorry, we don't have any money to do the show because we just bought all the reruns to Land of the Giants. So we got screwed by Land of the Giants.
Usually in Hollywood, when you have a guy like you who's been on so many shows, they keep giving you opportunities. Are you on some kind of kibosh list?
Probably, yeah. Now I think I am because I fight the government.
You're on some kind of list, man, where it's like you're a no-go.
Well, I got the famous thing is that I got really screwed by Coast to Coast, and I'm thinking that that's going to go away pretty soon. But it's Coast to Coast. I got in a bust up with the feds over in a civil lawsuit. By the way, it was in a civil lawsuit, which means that you didn't fill out their paperwork right. That's what they don't like. But when you get a civil lawsuit with these guys. And we had I can tell you very simply the facts. We put together I had a very small foreign exchange trading group. I had about 30 people that were my friends and family. And it was not my idea. There was a guy who approached me in Canada that said, could you put this thing together? Can we use your ability to remote view? And can we use this to predict what currencies will do? And I said, okay. And I came up with a technique to be able to do this. And we had about 30 people, and we were perfectly happy, and we were making money, just kind of chugging along. I made the mistake of simply mentioning what I was doing. I didn't proselytize. I didn't send out emails. I didn't enroll anybody. I wouldn't even know how to do it, to send out like a mass email or something. But I mentioned it. I made the mistake of mentioning it twice on Coast to Coast. And I just mentioned what I was doing. It's sort of like, I like riding horses, that sort of thing. And I said, we're noticing that there are these massive manipulations in the market. This was 2006. And that there were these massive manipulations where all these currencies would then tank. They would go down, and then some kind of invisible hand would then buy them all at once and bring them back up, which is how these super elites can make all these money. Perfectly legal. They can manipulate currencies. Unlike the risks that you run into when you manipulate stocks with inside trading information, it's perfectly legal to do anything you want with currency. And I'm just saying, look, something big and bad is about to happen here because of what's going on. Well, and they really staved off the collapse of the global economy in 2006. They staved it off, for what happened in 2008. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, they even admitted that the computers that do the accounting or the processing go to the hedge funds first, like milliseconds.
Yeah, now they found,
and then
they found
those hedge fund computers take over and will dump or buy, and then it gets released to the general public.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying? So it's like it's a total fraud. I mean, the stock market is a total fraud.
Well, the market is, yeah. And then also
the market is.
What we then discovered is that when you deal with a company like FXCM, which we discovered was a gigantic criminal enterprise. FXCM, by the way, was bailed out to the tune of $300 million, in the 2008 bailout. FXCM shut our accounts down. FXCM, the thing was, we'd figured out a way to beat them. And when you play foreign exchange, you don't realize that the company that's doing your trading for you, they're the dealer. You're in a casino and they're the dealer. And if you continue to beat the dealer, they'll just put better dealers on you until they find a way to beat you down. And,
Sean, let's talk about the bankers that are dying. Now, okay, that are being killed. Okay,
I mean,
these people are clearly being murdered. You can't have someone shoot themselves with a nail gun 7 times.
Yeah, the guy in Colorado, that was the best one. My theory on this is look, there is someone bringing these people to task, let's say. And my theory on this, and I've talked about this quite a few times, is it's very interesting that now you have Pope Francis and the Jesuits. People have no idea how powerful the church is behind the scenes. People do not understand that the entire global structure, and I can prove this, and I was one of those people that kind of poo-pooed people that talked about Vatican influence. But when you can prove that the entire global structure is in essence a trust, everything is set up as a trust. The chief executive officer for the corporation of the government of the United States, I can prove this. You can look on Manta.com. You can look him up and look up the Dun & Bradstreet number for the government of the United States, and you'll find it's Archbishop Derek R. McLeod, who is the head of the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., on the corner of 4th and Michigan. And I've tried to get him on my show. I've tried to interview him, but he's the CEO of the United States government. And the Vatican has now set up the world as a trust. And that trust is to hold everything in trust for the return of Jesus. And it doesn't matter if it's true or not. It doesn't matter if it's really going to happen or not. They believe it, and they've set up the world that way. Every single man, woman, and child within Vatican influence in the Christian Western world theoretically is supposed to be a beneficiary of that trust. And what happens at birth, and this is a whole other conversation, but what they do to you with the birth certificate is they kill you on paper. They turn your mother into a whore. They turn you into a bastard. They completely take away the rights of the father. And then they claim what's called parens patriae, which means the government's your dad, by having your mother sign as the informant, by having her sign her maiden name, by claiming that you're a natural birth rather than a legal birth, by claiming basically you're stillborn. So what they then do is they switch it so you become the trustee and they become the beneficiary, forcing you to have to then work and slave for them, basically as their slave for the rest of your life. Now, in regards to the bankers dying, I talked about this on my radio show, and I made a big deal about this. The Pope Francis, when he first came in, when he first came in, he issued a papal edict. And the papal edict, or a papal bull is what they call them, is that he removed the protection of the Roman Curiae from all of those who would harm the true children of God. What people don't understand is the Roman Curiae, that's civil law for the entire, for everything in the Western world. They've in essence now said, everybody that's committing crimes against the people, we're coming after you now. So what you've seen in the course of about 75 of these various bankers, and I'm not sure if it's the top guys or knowing that someone is coming for them, that they're ganking these lower level people who could finger them at the top. But when you look at
when I see Lloyd Blankfein, Jamie Dimon, and all the guys at Goldman Sachs and AIG, when they start going, then you'll know.
Exactly. See, that's
what I'm waiting for.
The people, it's these picayune people down at the bottom. But you'll notice that the majority of them, first off, they mostly come from J.P. Morgan. Second off, they usually have something to do with commodities. And the biggest thing is that the commodity markets, when you understand, there's only about maybe between, depending on how much it's valued on any given day, there's only between about $15 and about $25 billion worth of silver on the planet. that's it. And 30% of it is owned by Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, but the rest of it floating around out there. And yet you have a silver commodities exchange that's valued at $5 trillion. That's all fake. That's all based on paper.
Right.
Gold, nobody knows how much gold there is. There's trillions of dollars worth of gold. There's gold. The Germans have it. The Japanese have it. There's gold everywhere. But silver, it's very limited. So the minute they started doing silver and gold on paper as what they call ETFs, as chits basically, that's when you had George Soros get out of it. That's when you had the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds get out of it. And separating people like the Rothschilds from their bags of gold is pretty wild. But I do think that what's happening is I think that the Jesuits, who again are the
Sean,
police.
let's just take we're at a 30-minute mark.
Okay.
So let's just take a break and we'll be back in like 5 minutes. Is that
right.
Cool?
Thank
you could take a water break or So
I'll
we'll be right back in 5 minutes, folks.
You are listening to WCJV Digital Broadcasting, Youngstown, New York.
Paranormal King Radio Network has the best hosts and guests the paranormal has to offer. Every weekday, Mondays, 8 Eastern, Delaware Paranormal Princess Radio with Melissa Overton from the Paranormal Investigators of Delaware. Tuesday, 9 Eastern, Paranormal Teas and Ponderings with the teacher Frank Lee from Central Alabama Society for Paranormal Investigations and Research. Wednesdays, 8 Eastern, Paranormal Experience with Catherine Hobson from Spirit Communications and Research, Alabama. Thursday, 8 Eastern, Paranormal King Radio with the Paranormal King himself, Ross Rapaza. Fridays, 8 p.m., Paraversal Universe with Kevin Malik and Jennifer Sclessie from Northern Wisconsin Paranormal Society. Fridays, 11 Eastern, Dead Creek Radio, live with myself, Will Pritchard, from Dead Creek Paranormal. We strive to bring you the best paranormal stories in an educational, informative, and entertaining manner, only on Paranormal King Radio Network, where the paranormal will never be the same again.
I'm Mike Gray, and you're listening to Parley, and we're listening to our great guest, Sean David Morton. Sean, you still there?
I'm here.
Hey, how you doing?
Yeah, Parley, I like that. You should have like pirate music to open.
Parley, Parley means a discussion in terms, matey.
Yeah, why don't you have that? That seems.
Yeah, well, we're gonna put the we're gonna put some stuff up there.
Okay, all right. It's be such good fun.
Sean, don't complicate things, please.
Okay, I won't.
Well, Sean, let's we're talking about banksters getting their just desserts, I think.
Right.
And I was mentioning that, Bernie Madoff, after the scandal, and after he was on house arrest, his first son supposedly hung himself in his apartment. And the second son did an interview on 60 Minutes with the mom or his wife.
Okay.
And he died not too long ago from supposedly cancer. And just to mention John Corzine, he was the senator of New Jersey and the governor of New Jersey, and then he went to the I can't remember. He had something to do with commodities where he stole a lot of money from people's personal bank accounts.
Okay.
His son, I got to look up how his son died, but his son just recently, not too long, passed away from something.
All right.
So.
Well, it sounds like once again, the piper's being paid. It sounds like these people are all getting what they deserve.
And what were you saying about Chelsea? Chelsea Clinton's husband lost.
Yeah, he lost all their money. He lost like $200 million so they're broke now. Yeah, Chelsea married. She got married in George Soros's house to this guy, Mazinski, and who's once again a Jewish investment banker, and so she marries this this Jewish investment banker guy, and he's now basically lost all the Clinton's money.
Is this why Hillary was saying that you don't know how broke we are? We couldn't even afford a.
Well, she was talking about that time at the White House, but yeah, right now it's she's she lost all the dough. So it's pretty crazy. It's one of those things that's just one of those kind of funny stories. And again, I don't think Hillary was told in no uncertain terms that she was never going to be president of the United States by the Bilderbergers. And but they did say that what they would do to guarantee her good behavior, if you will, is that they would actually guarantee Chelsea's political future. I mean, I was saying this back in 2008 when the big debate was going on between Obama and the Clintons. And it didn't have anything to do with the actual election. They went to the Bilderberg meeting. They both attended the Bilderberg meeting in Chantilly, Virginia in May of 2008 to make these final decisions. And on the Clinton side, they were the ones saying, this guy, Barack Obama, this guy isn't even a citizen, for God's sakes. He's not even an American. And the Bilderberg's like, we don't care. We'll get away with that.
So basically it was just a way to humiliate, in my mind, humiliate Dick Cheney and the Clintons.
What did Dick Cheney have to do with anything?
Well, did you see the look on Dick Cheney's face when they, remember, in that ceremony when the president becomes a president?
Oh, you mean when Obama screwed up the oath that he couldn't take the first time?
Well, no. Well, I don't know, but remember when Bush was being booed off the podium? Remember that?
Yeah.
That's when Obama was doing the oath, and Dick Cheney was there, and I don't know if he was in his wheelchair then, but he just gave Obama a look like, if I could kill you,
Yeah, probably.
You know what I mean? So
bottom line. The discussion went something like, well, Hillary, the dogs don't like you. We can't sell you like dog food to the American people, really. If we were to institute the stuff that we're going to institute, specifically, the whole Obamacare healthcare package was the same thing that Hillary was peddling back in 93 and 94. The same shenanigans that would have voted Clinton out of office in 96 had it not been for Oklahoma City and them pinning that on Rush Limbaugh and the right wing. Although Clinton was given a choice, you either go to war with Iraq because there was an Iraqi agent provocateur, or you pin it on your enemies, which is what he did. But the whole point of this being is that, Hillary, look, not your time, not your turn. It's not going to happen for you. But What we will do is that we will, if you just lay down and take it, we'll guarantee Chelsea's political future, and make sure that you're okay. And of course, she became Secretary of State because remember, it was the war between the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers. The Rothschilds with George Soros are the ones that backed Obama. George Soros wrote an $80 million check to make Barack Obama president of the United States. And again, the Rothschild side, the Rothschilds control the old money and they control the banks and they control the capital, whereas the Rockefellers control the oil and primarily the technology as well. So that's why you always have a Rockefeller toady as Secretary of State, because they're responsible for primarily the delivery and transport of oil around the world. So that's what they do.
Aren't the Rockefellers divesting themselves of oil now?
Yeah, they just did, which bodes for something very interesting as to what might happen with alternative energy, and especially since now we're running U.S. warships on seawater, and now you have a car out of Europe which is called the Quant, which is now actually the Quant is actually running on seawater now. It's a hydrocarbon flow cell that's running on seawater. That's technology that's 50 years old that they're finally using in this incredible sports car that's got like 900 horsepower and 0 to 60 in like 2 seconds and all kinds of crazy stuff. But the whole thing with Hillary is that they needed somebody new. They needed somebody like that. And let me give you a brief conversation. Years ago, my family was very politically active, and this is back in the 70s when I was in high school. But we had a dinner party and these were just people that we knew that were friends, with Ayn Rand and her boyfriend, not her husband, but her boyfriend, and Eldridge Cleaver, who was also a good friend of ours. And Eldridge Cleaver was the one going back and forth with Ayn Rand, where Eldridge Cleaver was like, you mark my words, when the New World Order is going to put the hammer down on America and turn it into the slave camp, they're going to make a black man president of the United States. And they're going to use your white guilt against you, and they're going to use they're going to use what they do to blacks in this country. They're going to use them as the shock troops to be able to come down and create the New World Order. This was Eldridge Cleaver in a conversation with Ayn Rand. With Ayn Rand saying, yes, well, of course they want to go after the mainstream of human progress. And Eldridge Cleaver going, yeah, the mother effing man trying to keep us down. You right, sister. So it's very interesting dichotomy.
Speaking of Ayn Rand, did you ever hear that she was the mistress of one of the Rothschilds, and that the book Atlas Shrugged is a coded book for the elite?
Okay.
That according to John Todd.
Why not? She had an arrangement with her husband to see Brandon. What was his name? He just died just a couple of weeks ago.
And wasn't Greenspan like an acolyte of hers, or like?
Yeah, Greenspan wasn't bad. Greenspan kept us above water, and Greenspan, I'm not saying bad, but yes, Greenspan was, they all are kind of this libertarian aspect. But remember, she's also very, she didn't want any borders. She wanted free trade. She didn't want any really government protections, and she was kind of radical that way. But it's anyway, I'm just pointing out that the Hillary Clinton-Obama debate was not your turn. We're gonna make sure Chelsea's okay. Chelsea marries this very wealthy Jewish banker, gets married in George Soros's house. Actually, he's somehow related to Mark Richards as well. I had the whole lineage in my head as to who she was related to and all that. But you'll see her. I'm sure that she'll eventually, probably, maybe in 4 to 6 years, probably become the U.S. Senator for New York, because that seems to be the Senate seat that they've got the lock on. That was the seat that was guaranteed to Hillary, by the way, way long back for her to play the game, on her way to becoming supposedly president of the United States. And by the way, she would have been the nominee. She was the one at the Democratic convention that stopped the vote. She was the one that actually turned all the delegates from New York to say, no, you have to vote for Barack Obama. She was the one that stood up and said, we're not going to finish the vote. We're just going to nominate Barack Obama. So she was the one that engineered everything to make Obama president. So they really had to have something on her, which was either we will kill your child, or we will make sure your child is politically taken care of. So there's that. Anyway, sorry, I just want to talk about my other 2 books, if I could, please.
Yes, please.
Sands of Time is because there's some other things going on now with a film that with Sands of Time. When I was messing around with Area 51, a gentleman began to come in contact with me who became a very valuable source inside the government that allowed me to then relate a lot of very interesting information on Coast to Coast. And I became a conduit for a great deal of very interesting information about what was going on inside and behind the scenes from a gentleman who I later found out had become very much one of the very top people in what they called the group, and a group of technocrats, if you will, that were studying flying saucers. In essence, we're studying anti-gravity, we're studying teleportation, we're studying all these ways to, specifically with the ultimate goal of everything they were doing was to figure out a way to basically alter and or travel through time. And time travel was a huge interest of theirs. And over the course of these about 20 years or so, from 91, this gentleman gave me all kinds of information and would meet me at expos in rather mysterious ways. And so about almost 5 years ago now, I got a call from some lawyers who said that this gentleman had, quote, moved on, and his estate had something for me. And I went and met with these really spooky lawyers who gave me these journals of this man who turned out to be the guy on the inside, the guy working at Area 51 and at Dulce and at Montauk and all these different places with so what I did is I took those journals and I turned them into I guess what you would say an action adventure kind of story. I just kind of pumped it up a bit and fixed a lot of it, and presented the true story of this Dr. Ted Humphrey, who not only was the original man in black, if you will, but then became the actual leader of this organization called the Group, which dealt in primarily planetary defense, technology and planetary defense, and you got the inside scoop on everything that was going on at Dulce and the Dulce wars and conflicts and why we went to war with them and every other thing. So genetic experimentations and how there were deals made with these extraterrestrial races and what was going on. So those became Sands of Time, which is volume 1 and volume 2, and I'm working on trying to get this year. I'm hoping to get part 3 of Sands of Time out, which really gets interesting because that has to do with all of our dealings with our off-world facilities on the moon and Mars and certain moons of Saturn and Jupiter, and really gets into the nitty gritty of what happens with time and how they were actually using these experiments to specifically the study of the craft at Area 51. We weren't so interested in the propulsion systems as we were about the fact that these ships actually had the ability to dilate and or expand time.
Do you think that Saturn and its rings are some kind of dish in space, an artificial dish in space? And that it's used as some type of amplifier, or
Well, the Saturnian rings are an artificial construct. We have photographs of what makes them, and we have, for all intents and purposes, you could take probably Arthur C. Clarke's work in 2001 and 2010 and 2030. But I guess you could call them. I think if you remember the monoliths in 2001, rather than being a monolith, there are these gigantic kind of hexagonal tubes that are they're used throughout the solar system. And there was a book by Norm. And it was a fascinating book that I have. He signed for me. I know you can't get it anywhere now, but I had dinner with him at his house, and it's called The Ring Makers of Saturn. And what we see is that there are these gigantic objects that are actually, for whatever reason, creating the rings of Saturn. They are actually processing what appears to be ore or meteors or something and grinding it out and creating these colors in the rings. But you see these objects all across the solar system, and occasionally we run into them. The Russians ran into them in their Phobos probe. There was one of these gigantic objects was in front of the moon Phobos, doing what appeared to be loading. And as the Russian 2 Phobos probe got closer to it, this thing turned and basically ate the probe. And Marina Popovich, who is a Russian cosmonaut, we sponsored her coming to the United States, where she showed these photographs of the Russian probes actually taking shots of a ship that was almost 2 miles long. That was they're all shaped like stop signs. They're octagonal. They have 8 ridge sides on them, which gets kind of more interesting because then if you realize that the backside of the moon, the one main crater on the backside of the moon, what's called the Tsaroslavsky crater, actually looks like a giant stop sign. It's actually an edged 8-sided octagon. Right, yeah. That once again, what it appears as though is that whatever these giant ships are, that it's some kind of engine that was then plugged into the back of the moon that then powered the moon into orbit, which is another reason why there are massive pockmarks and meteorites on the face of the moon and yet none on the backside. And by the way, we've now established that all the research points to the moon being an artificial satellite. It's a gigantic titanium yttrium sphere that's covered with about 28 miles worth of dirt, primarily, which is iron oxide. And if you mine iron oxide and crush it, you can actually generate a ton of iron oxide will generate you a quarter ton of oxygen. So you could actually very successfully go to the moon and colonize it almost right away with drillers and put up some domes and what have you. Anyway, so with Sands of Time, it's 40 years in the shadow government. It's the true story of a man who's behind the scenes at the Dulce Wars, Area 51, the development of time travel technology, the Montauk Project, and all the deep, dark, black world projects going on behind the scenes. And it interacts with so many other people's stories, with Phil Schneider, with Bob Lazar, and people that have read the books, 3 or 4 times actually. And they've gotten something like 250 5-star ratings on Amazon. The book's been called epic and stunning and wondrous. So you can go to my website. You can go to strangeuniverseradio.com. You can go to Amazon. I appreciate it if you go to my website because Amazon does take a cut. But you go to Amazon and get the books, and it's part 1 and part 2. I had originally published a hardback edition, but it was just too thick and too much, so I divided it up into 2 books.
Well, I bought you Sands of Time, so.
Thank you. All right.
Yes,
cool.
Yes.
So there you go. So there's Sands of Time, and it's everything and anything you want to know about the shadow government and what's been going on behind the scenes. What I do think, however, is that, and I'm in disagreement with a lot of people who think that these guys in the super technology are trying to kill all of us. What I see is as the goal of 2 groups. I see a group of autocrats like the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers that are basically, it's kind of a Corleone versus Sopranos turf war, if you will. The Rockefellers just want to create war and death and destruction and don't care who they kill. To give you an idea of what life would be like under the Rockefellers, we learned when Russia went bankrupt and David Rockefeller appeared in St. Petersburg as the executor basically of the Russian estate, that the entire Soviet Union was nothing more than a front corporation for the Rockefellers. So to give you an idea, the Russian government, the Soviets, murdered about 125 million people in their 79-year reign of terror, and all of that was funded, financed, and profitized by the Rockefellers. The same Rockefellers, by the way, that Vladimir Putin kicked out when he came to power and paid off all of Russia's debts to the IMF.
Why doesn't somebody just kill them all?
Who would do that? Who would do that? Considering, what army? You want to get a group of mercenaries?
An army? You just get some mercenaries. You get some snipers, and they go out in public. Wherever they go, you just snipe them.
It's harder to do than you think. On the other side, so that's the Rockefellers. On the other side, you have the Rothschilds, who control all the banking stuff, and they're perfectly happy with easing us into a socialist age, where once again we, to make us all like France or England and. Again, they're willing to build us a cage and with a blanket and a pillow in it that has a little health care that has, that looks like France, where, you're willing to give up everything in exchange for that. But the autocrats are basically setting up a prison, an economic, socio-political new world order. On the other side, you have the technocrats. And the technocrats are guys with the super technology, stuff that I saw at Area 51, stuff like not just saucers, but we saw a craft out there that was a shuttle that was almost 1,600 feet from tip to tail that floated over our heads that looked right out of Star Wars. It was like the opening scene of Star Wars, and we're sitting there while the thing is flying over us. Where does it come from? Where does it go? Who mans those things? Are there bases on the moon? Are there
Where are they
Mars?
built?
That's the other thing. But remember that once you understand what gravity is, not what it does, but what it is, once you get outside of Newtonian physics, and you understand, and you can now create gravity as a wave, if you will, or as a beam, exactly like you would create gamma rays or X-rays. Now you can build anything. Now you can build, a kid with a box of Legos could build New York City. Because once you deal with mass without having to worry about weight, doesn't matter how big something is. You can just float stuff up into the air. You can build it anywhere. So, do you build it in space? Do you build it off planet? Do you build it somewhere else? And also, once you understand gravity, now with gravity, and if you can create intensified gravity fields, well, now you're dealing with time, because now you can actually warp and or manipulate time. As far as maybe traveling in the future, maybe traveling in the past, I'm not quite so sure. But now you have quite possibly two-way time travel, one way or the other. But what they're doing is that, number one, their primary goals is, or should I say number one is to calm down the sun. All kinds of things, all kinds of weird stuff has been happening with the sun. We've had planet-sized motherships and all kinds of weird things just trying to calm down the sun, because the sun is in this hyperactivating cycle where it could just go completely crazy, and which it did, by the way, 14,500 years ago. The sun went crazy and wiped out all life on Earth as we know it, with the exception of about 2,000 people from which we're descended. The other thing they're trying to do is that they're actually manipulating the geography of the Earth as well to create a series of earthquakes and, I guess you could say, natural disasters, which will then ameliorate greater natural disasters. I am convinced that for example, the Northridge quake, which happened here in Los Angeles, and I predicted it, and I told people what was going to happen months before. I was on the radio talking about it, that the Northridge quake was an artificial controlled roll that was absolutely induced by the military using sonics and explosives to make sure that pressure was relieved from the San Andreas Fault. And after that quake, we have not had a single really major quake in Southern California for now almost 20 plus years.
Let's talk about the Gulf incident, okay? Real quick.
And how it's affecting the weather in New York.
Okay, when that happened, I remember on the news they said a SWAT team, that Obama sent a SWAT team to that platform. Did you remember that?
No.
Okay. And there were people that were saying that there was a lot of shenanigans going on that platform, like they were shipping in prostitutes. Did you hear about that?
Well, that's
before,
fairly common, though.
Before the incident happened, they switched out the whole crew. And right. and then when the thing went kablooey, they just let that thing bleed. They didn't even try to stop it.
Correct.
Okay.
I can tell you what. You know why they did that?
Yeah. You're saying they did that to relieve the pressure underneath.
Yeah.
To stop the Madrid quake that was coming.
Well, to do a lot of things. Yeah, the New Madrid fault, but it's also there's three main pressure points on the planet. If you actually put a triangle inside the planet, the three main pressure points are Giza, Egypt, which sits directly underneath a gigantic granite plate in the planet that goes for about 100 square miles or so. The Great Pyramid of Giza sits right on top of that. If you could ring the Great Pyramid like a bell, if you actually put a sonic device inside the Great Pyramid, you could ring the entire planet like a bell from that granite plate. Then if you then divide the circle at 360 degrees and you go exactly 120 degrees east of Giza, you come out directly just off the coast of Tokyo. And I think that the Fukushima quake there, which was artificially induced, they kickstarted it using a low-grade nuclear device. And then what you do is you kickstart the wave, and that creates the pulse. And then when the pulse goes through the planet and then comes back up, you then use the HARP project to be able to then to tap the top of that wave. So the Fukushima quake was actually 3 or 4 separate smaller quakes that started at 5, then became a 6.4, then became a 7.2, then eventually was the 9.3. But they used explosives and then sonics to be able to tap the top of the wave. The reason they triggered Fukushima was 1, to make sure a massive earthquake didn't wipe out all of Tokyo. 2, you had a minimal amount of casualties in a rural area. You only had 16,000 people die, which is not that big a deal. 3, there was not a single building that was actually knocked down by the earthquake. Everything was knocked down by the tsunami, which I think was just an unexpected after effect of them triggering the quake. You had people standing on top of buildings while the tsunami was coming in. If you had a 9.3 quake 40 miles off the coast of Los Angeles, we'd be done. I mean, we'd be done. There'd be nothing left standing by the time the tidal wave got there. So not a single building was knocked down by the quake. They were all knocked down by the tsunami.
Well, you would have thought they would have at least took Fukushima offline.
It was old. Fukushima's a piece of crap. It's the thing's 40 years old, and they were warning them about it all over and over again. And this is where the punishment aspect of this might come from, because there's a good possibility that Fukushima was being used for actual atomic fissionable material to be able to give that to not only the Israelis, but possibly the Iranians as well, and various Arab characters to be able to build atomic bombs. So there was probably a reason that Fukushima was taken out. Right. And there may be, all these people are talking about the radiation and everything else. A lot of that might be propaganda from the oil companies to make sure that they don't build any more nuclear reactors, because now they've, again, they're now very much more dependent on foreign oil. But by that quake, that 9.3 quake, it altered the nodal axis of the planet by 6.5 inches. It stopped any more earthquakes that would come from, you basically stopped earthquakes and volcanoes in, Vancouver, Victoria Island, Seattle, Portland, all the way along the Pacific Northwest. So there's that. And you then altered the nodal axis of the Earth. Every single one of these quakes that has been happening over the course of the last 5 years, from the Fuji earthquake, and by the way, they're happening in a pattern. They happen in a pattern of 188 days. Every 188 days. Fuji, 188 days, you had Bio Chile, which was an 8.3, which also altered the axis of the Earth. 188 days later, you had New Zealand. 188 days later, you had Fukushima. 188 days later, you had 2 earthquakes, a 7.4 and a 7.6, on the San Andreas fault line, but down in Mexico. And the Mexicans warned everybody months in advance. They had a big earthquake drill where they emptied the schools and the businesses, and everybody had a big party that day when the earthquakes hit. So they're warning people in advance when the quakes are going to hit and that they're going to do them, which doesn't sound to me like a global depopulation agenda. But what they're doing is they're altering the nodal axis of the Earth, 1, to bring us in line with galactic center, because that's what happened in December 21st of 2012. 2, to keep the planet from tipping over. Now, once again, you take the Great Pyramid of Giza and you go exactly 130 miles due west, and you come out right on top of the Deepwater Horizon, right there. And they only had licenses.
We got 4 minutes left.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Well, they only had licenses to drill down 17,000 feet. They drilled down 48,000 feet into an asphalt volcano, and then just let it bleed for month after month after month, because they needed to once again alter the spin and axis of the planet to keep us from tipping over, in my opinion.
Oh, amazing. And the core exit?
The core exit was, again, a ridiculous mistake. They put all the Corexit in because they wanted the oil to sink, but what it did was desalinate the water. So now instead of having an ecological disaster on the surface because they didn't like how it looked with some birds and some dolphins, now the ecological disaster is on the seafloor, which has destroyed just about everything. You put Corexit in, it desalinates the water. Now you have what's called the thermohaline. And the thermohaline is the warm water that comes from the Gulf that then goes around the peninsula of Florida, comes up the East Coast, and then dumps warm air over onto Europe. But what's happening now is because the water's been desalinated and the Corexit has disrupted the thermohaline, now the warm water only gets about as far as Boston and New York, making it savagely cold. Now you have the North Pole, which is now moving and is now sitting in the middle of the Siberian Sea rather than being up in Canada. Now you have the perfect storm where the Siberian Express is coming up over the top, creating a polar vortex, and you see how weird all this stuff is.
God.
Which means that New York is in a lot of trouble because in 1995 we remote viewed New York in 2015, and I will tell you for certain that there is going to be massive flooding in New York and New York State. Savage snowstorms. I've been talking about this for years. That 2015 was the target year, and they're going to have to start evacuating big chunks of Manhattan. And a matter of fact, when it happened in 2012, I had people in my remote viewing classroom way back then say, "Oh my God, this is what we saw. We saw water, gushes of water coming into the subways underwater, lower part of Manhattan underwater." And it's going to happen again. It's going to be worse than Sandy this time around. It's going to happen this year, and it's something that we viewed literally 20 years ago.
Hey, Sean, we've got less than a minute. Let's wrap this up because that's an hour. Unless you want to go another hour.
No, that's it. That's right. I got to eat dinner. StrangeUniverseRadio.com. My radio show's on from 3 to 5 on freedomslips.com. RevolutionRadio.rocks if you want to pick up that. Monday through Friday, 3 to 5.
Well, I really want to thank our guest, Sean David Morton at StrangeUniverseRadio.com. And I want to thank all our great listeners for supporting us at CJ Mars. And listen next week for another great show of Parley. Bye, y'all.
That's all, folks.